fighter aircraft flown by young men and maintained by very young men too, because the pilots were on thing, but they were not alone. And these events, the old Churchill quotation is still probably the answer to the real importance of these events in the history of mankind. So many owed so much to so few. After that, you go into history studies, and for instance, you can look at the importance of the Battle of France and the importance of this and that, but the facts can't be erased. Martlet. That's what they were called, that's how they were called here. Avenger. That's how they were called there in the Pacific. And more generally, these aircraft, these two aircraft, are a tribute to Grumman. Roy Grumman was a tough-minded engineer from New York, who in fact had started as a naval engineer, and but very soon he turned his mind, this was during World War I, he turned his mind to aviation and decided he was going to build aircraft for the navies, which was strange. In the beginning he built float planes, and but then having sold his machinery to the US Navy, the Grumman Company, which was located near New York in Long Island, they built some biplanes, just like Hawkers with the Furies, and derived from, just like Hawkers had derived from the Fury, the Hurricane monoplane, they derived from some biplanes this stubby little fighter called the Wildcat. The first customer for the Wildcat were the French. The French Navy ordered a lot, but they were not delivered until the armistice in June 1940. And so the Royal Navy said, okay, give them to us, we'll do something with them. And they called them the Martlet ones, and that's how the British started using Grumman equipment. While in the Pacific, when the Americans started having problems with the Japanese after 1941, in the beginning the American Navy, the US Navy, was equipped mostly, as when it comes to fighter, with this little Wildcat, which was a fantastic aircraft. Very light, despite the fact that being used on an aircraft carrier, it has to be more than tough, built like a bridge. And the Wildcat was so successful that Grumman became the provider of number one provider of aircraft for the US Navy. And very soon, in 1942, they went to the US Navy and said, we have your torpedo bomber, a big, huge thing, able to cover very, very long distances above the Pacific and be used against the Japanese Navy. And this is it, this big three-seat carrier-based bomber. Among the people who flew this aircraft, the youngest pilot in the history of the US Navy, youngest combat pilot in the history of US Navy, was later to become quite famous, politically speaking, as President of the United States. And of course, that same president had a son who became president of the United States himself, and he was a pilot again. The Bush family. It's a family of pilots. But George Bush, the first, was an Avenger pilot. He was flying a machine like that, and he was 19 years old. And clocked a few hair-raising combat missions with his Avenger against the Japanese Navy in the Pacific. Wildcats were used in the Pacific, of course, but there is one pilot which deserves our salute today, and who started as a Martlet pilot, very British gentleman, and probably one of the greatest pilots of all time. His name is Eric Brown. And Eric Brown started as a fighter pilot flying exactly the same machine as this one. If you've Avenger with the torpedo bay opened, the Avenger was a strange fighting machine, big and bulky, and you would say, well, it's not a machine to go to war with, but it was rugged, it was almost armored, and finally, a few Avenger pilots even used the Avenger as a fighter, fighting against
and of course, all the New Zealand pilots used them as dive bombers. They were dive bombers, precision dive bombers.
Back to the Wildcat. Eric Brown said that this was one of his favorite aircraft, and when you look at it flying, you're just, it's a superb aircraft. It's squared off everywhere. It has this big round fuselage. It looks like a pregnant guppy, but it's, look at that. You would not use your Wildcat against a Japanese Zero in dogfight, because the Zero was a monster in dogfight. But if you use the Wildcat in the vertical plane, doing the yo-yo, using energy and diving after that to regain energy, you could not only survive, but do fantastic things with it. And the Royal Navy, with the Martlets, found out that the Wildcats could be very, very, very efficient against the German aircraft. And of course, with pilots like Eric Brown, he was gifted, yes, but he was typical of the Royal Navy pilot of early World War II. The Wildcat or Martlet was very, very efficient too, and gave birth to something which became, by many standards, considered as a #1 naval fighter of all times, which is a Hellcat. The Avenger was flown by a Swiss gentleman, Mr. Callam. This aircraft was based here in England, and then has been sold to a Lausanne-based collection. The Avenger is interesting. Look at the surface of all these flaps. And it's made with a long-legged landing gear. It's an aircraft you can slam on, go around. The Avenger goes around, Mr. Calam goes around while the Wildcat is landing. It's Tony Southwood flying the Wildcat with his very strange landing gear. On early Wildcats you had to take the gear down, you had to use a handle, and it was what, 36 turns I think to take the gear down and 36 turns to take the gear up, and so it was very muscular.